There is a wall in Manhattan with the marks of a bomb still in it. They have been there for more than 100 years, and the bank that owns that wall decided, deliberately, never to repair them. 38 people were killed on the street outside it. About 300 more were injured. Nobody was ever arrested for it. Nobody was ever charged. The investigators had exactly one piece of physical evidence that led anywhere. It was a horse. Noon Thursday, the 16th of September, 1920. The lunch rush was starting on Wall Street. A man drove a horse-drawn cart to a stop in front of the United States Assay Office, directly across from the J.P. Morgan building at the corner of Wall and Broad. He climbed down, walked away, and went into the crowd. People saw him leave. Not one of them could ever describe him in a way that was any use to anybody. At 12:01, the cart came apart. It was set on a timer, which means that by the time it went off, whoever built it had already chosen to be somewhere else. The cart was packed with heavy iron window sash weights, and the explosion threw them down the street like shot. The horse and the wagon were blown into fragments. Inside the Morgan building, shrapnel came through the big ground-floor windows and destroyed most of the interior. 30 people died where they were standing. 8 more died of their injuries over the following days. They were overwhelmingly young messengers, stenographers, clerks, runners for the brokerage houses, the people who were outside at noon because that is when they were let out. The chief clerk of J.P. Morgan was killed at his desk beside the window. J.P. Morgan himself was in Europe. His son was among the wounded. 2 questions have sat over this case for a century, and neither one has ever been answered. Made his first decision, and it had nothing to do with either question. William Remick, the president of the exchange, suspended trading inside a minute to stop a panic on the floor. That was the institution's first reflex: protect the market. Out on the street, the reflexes were different. A 17-year-old messenger named James Saul took a parked car that did not belong to him and drove 30 injured people to hospital in it. Police officers gave first aid where people had fallen and commandeered every vehicle within reach to move the wounded. By the afternoon, there were soldiers on Wall Street brought in to guard the scene and the buildings around it. They had a particular reason to be at the sub-treasury next door. $900 million in gold bars were being moved through that building that day. For a while, investigators wondered whether the bomb had been cover for a robbery attempt. They looked at it, and they dropped it. Within days, the police had done something genuinely impressive. From the wreckage, they reconstructed the bomb and its fuse mechanism. They could tell you how it worked. What they could not agree on was what had been inside it. Read the newspapers from that week in order and you can watch the story fail to settle. 16 dead, 30 dead, 31 slain, 33, 34, 36, 37, 38. One front page calls it a TNT bomb, another calls it dynamite. A third just calls it an infernal machine. The Bureau's own case history is blunt about why. There was much debate about the nature of the explosive, and every one of the possible components was something anybody could buy. That is worth sitting with, because it is the first honest thing in this story. 6 days after the largest bombing in the country's history, in the most photographed street in America, the people investigating it could not agree on how many had died or what had killed them. There was one real lead, and it arrived before the explosion did. A letter carrier working the neighborhood picked up 4 flyers. They were crudely printed and crudely spelled, and they demanded the release of political prisoners. They were signed American anarchist fighters. The text ran, "Remember, we will not tolerate any longer. Free the political prisoners, or it will be sure death for all of you." William Flynn, who ran the Bureau of Investigation, said they looked like flyers from a bombing campaign the previous year. 4 pieces of paper. That is the case. Everything else that might have identified the man who did this was lying in the street, and the street was cleaned that night. By 3:30 that afternoon, the Board of Governors of the Stock Exchange had met and voted to open for business the next morning. So crews worked through the night. Here is how the Bureau describes what they cleared away in its own words. Crews cleaned the damage up overnight, including physical evidence that today would be crucial to identifying the perpetrator. Carted off, and it worked. By the next morning, Wall Street was trading again. Broken windows draped with canvas, staff at their desks in bandages, and the exchange open on time. The institution had made its choice within 3.5 hours of the blast, and the choice was continuity over evidence. Nobody decided to protect a bomber that night. That is the part worth being careful about. They decided to open the market, and protecting the bomber is simply what that decision did. There is a stranger detail about the following day. Something had already been booked into that same intersection. The Sons of the American Revolution had a Constitution Day rally scheduled at that exact corner for the 17th of September. They went ahead with it. Thousands of people came and stood on the spot deliberately in defiance. 2 days after 38 people were killed there, it was a public square again. Meanwhile, the Bureau did the work properly. Agents interviewed hundreds of people who had been near that corner before, during, and after the explosion. The Bureau's own summary of the result is 1 line long. It developed little information of value. The few recollections of the driver and the wagon were vague and virtually useless. Officially, the blame landed fast: anarchists and communists. The Washington Post called the bombing an act of war. Public pressure to produce somebody expanded the Bureau's remit, including a new General Intelligence Division under a young J. Edgar Hoover. So they stopped chasing the man and started chasing the objects. Detectives visited every sash weight manufacturer and every sash weight dealer in the United States. And then they went to the stables, 500 of them in towns up and down the Atlantic coast. Because of the horse. The animal had been blown apart, but its shoes came through it intact, and the shoes were new. Somebody had shod that horse recently, and a blacksmith who shoes a horse tends to remember the man who brought it in. That is a real trail. It is the only one this case ever produced. The trail had a hole at the front of it. They could not locate the owner of the stable responsible for the work. It took until October to find the blacksmith at all. And when they finally sat him down, he could offer the police little information. That is it. That is the end of the only physical trail in the case. Not a dead end at the far side of something, a dead end about 6 feet in. There was one more thing they had counted on, and it did not come either. When a bomb goes off early, the man who set it is very often among the dead. Investigators went through the victims specifically looking for the driver. He was not there. Whoever drove that cart to that corner walked away from it and was never accounted for by anybody. What followed was years of arrests that went nowhere. The Secret Service and the Bureau interrogated thousands of people and arrested a great many radicals. Historians who have gone through the files describe the pattern. The arrests produced headlines, and each time they failed to support an indictment. One suspect, an Italian named Pietro Angelo, was linked to a bomb plot from the year before. He produced an alibi. He was deported to Italy anyway. The theories kept getting bigger as the evidence stayed missing. The Bureau's first instinct was specific: followers of an Italian anarchist named Luigi Gallini. It could not be proved, and Gallini himself had already left the country. By the Harding administration, officials were assessing whether the Soviet Union or the Communist Party of the United States had masterminded it. A case with no physical evidence will expand to fit whoever you are most afraid of. There is one person in this story who knew the bomb was coming. In the days before the 16th of September, a man started mailing postcards to his friends. The message was the same each time: get out of the Wall Street area before the 16th. He was a lawyer. He was also a champion tennis player. His name was Edwin Fisher. This was not a detail that surfaced later. The New York Times ran it on the front page the next morning, in the headline itself, next to the number of the dead. Toronto fugitives sent warnings here. The man who predicted it was headline news within 24 hours. They picked him up and asked him the only question that mattered. How did you know? He told them the warning had reached him pressed on it. He was more specific than that. Through the air from God. And then the whole thing came apart in their hands. Fisher sent warnings like that all the time. It was a habit. He had been in and out of mental hospitals for years. And on the 16th of September, by Britannica's account, he was not even in the country, he was in Canada. On the 18th, the New York Times printed the finding as a headline of its own. He was committed. The finding was that he was insane, but harmless. He was not the bomber, he was never charged, and he was the closest thing to a witness this case ever had. The only man who saw it coming was the one man who could not possibly have done it. So let me give you the strongest answer anyone has, and let me put it as well as it can be put. His name was Mario Buda. He was a galleonist and an associate of Sacco and Vanzetti. He built timer bombs packed with sash weights, the same thing that came out of that cart. He is credited with several of the largest package bombs the group ever used, including one that killed 9 policemen in Milwaukee. In November 1920, he sailed for Italy and never came back. He was never arrested. He was never even questioned. And in 1955, an anarchist named Charles Pogge was driven down to Wall Street by Buda's own nephew, who said, "Let's drive downtown and see my uncle's bomb. Now hold that against me as hard as I have been holding it against everybody else. Every piece of it is a memory. It is friends of a dead man talking decades afterwards about conversations. There is no physical evidence tying Mario Buda to that corner. There never will be. And the reason there never will be is the thing this entire story turns on. The physical evidence went into a cart on the night of the 16th of September so that the exchange could open on time. The Bureau kept coming back to this file for decades. When it reviewed the case in the 1940s, it went through the organizations it had suspected: the Union of Russian Workers, the IWW, the Communists, and concluded that none of them had any hand in the matter, and that the work had been done by Italian anarchists. It still could not name a person. Its own final word on the case is 3 words long, and the thing about the second question, why did they stop, is that on the available evidence they didn't. Historians who follow the galleonists past 1920 have them continuing for another 12 years. The campaign ends in 1932 with a bomb at the house of Webster Thayer, the judge who had presided over the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. Thayer survived it. His house did not, and he spent the last 18 months of his life under guard around the clock. So perhaps nobody stopped. Perhaps the only thing that stopped was our ability to see them. No memorial was ever built. There is no plaque at that corner and no list of names. What there is the wall. J.P. Morgan and Company said that in defiance of whoever had done this, they would not repair the outside of the building. They never did. Decades later, the New York Times called the damage a badge of honor. Pogge, standing on that pavement in 1955, said you could still see it. You still can. 38 people, 1 horse, 4 flyers. And a man who heard it coming through the air, who was telling the truth about hearing it.